technically, I would say he could have been insensitive and provoking them. But as soon as we move to so he could cry self-defense, we're into the realm of premeditation. He wasn't insensitive. In that case, we're into the realm of he knew full well what he was doing, and he intended. And so we're falling right back into that, is he guilty or is he innocent?
Thank you for tuning in to the Removing Barriers podcast. I'm Jay.
And I'm MCG.
And we're attempting to remove barriers so we can all have a clear view of the cross.
This is episode 31 of the Removing Barriers podcast. And in this episode, we'll be looking at the situation surrounding Kyle Rittenhouse and discussing whether he's a murderer or a self-defender. And we have a guest. Brother MD, welcome back
Thank
to
you.
Removing Barriers podcast.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. We're glad to have you back here again. All right, we're going to talk about Kyle Rittenhouse, whether or not he's a murderer or a self-defender. But before we get into all the details, MD, tell me, who is Kyle Rittenhouse and what do we know about the entirety of the situation?
What I've been able to learn basically supported what I already thought to be true, but there's been a great deal more detail. He is a high school dropout. Mm-hmm. He is now 19 years old, but in the events in Kenosha, Wisconsin, he was almost 18. He was actually 17, short of 18 by about a month.
Yeah, he was August 25th or 26th, somewhere around there?
Somewhere around there, yes. And he is very much a police supporter. And in fact, his social media pages showed numerous pictures of him in his police cadet uniform. He did ride-alongs with the police in his hometown. They liked him. They knew him very, very well. He was, as I say, very much a police supporter. He started a fund of his own to get people to understand the police, to bring them together. He did his scouting cadets program in behalf of the police. So what we know about him was a very law-abiding, law-loving young man, although he was a dropout from high school. Apparently. I haven't been able to really get a transcript on him, so I don't know for sure. Beyond that, he was a young man who was a member of a militia, or at least affiliated with a militia. He had told friends he was going to Kenosha to defend the businesses there, and in particular one article I read indicated he worked at. And that was a car dealership. Mm-hmm. I lived, and this may surprise you too, but my wife and I lived when we were 19 years old, only been married a year, probably within about 2 blocks of where all this occurred.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So I read the name of the road where it occurred, and I thought, good grief, I know where that is. And Kenosha, that was literally right across the street from our house in Illinois. That's how close we were. So I know the area, or at least I knew the area, we'll just say many years ago. It's been more than 50. And I know the general character of the people who were there, and I don't think it's changed much because the area is very much affiliated with the Great Lakes Naval Base. And in fact, where we lived was half a mile from the Great Lakes Naval Base. So when the news articles talked about the fact that Kenosha is on the Great Lakes and is close to Illinois, and most people don't realize just how close that is. We do because we live very, very close to, and yet we live very close to, yet we live in, and people who live in the middles of their states may not realize how easily we cross state lines.
Right.
Very critical to his case is the difference in laws between Illinois and Wisconsin.
Right.
So what we know about him is he was a law-abiding young man. He was not a troublemaker. He was not given to being in trouble with the police. What we know about, from what I read, what we know about the relationship he had with the police was that when they went to arrest him in his hometown, they treated him very, very politely, very professionally. It didn't seem to bother the people near where he lived that they did that. So there was no us versus them in their relationship. I was rather impressed by Kyle Rittenhouse. I watched the videos which many of the news organizations talked about, which were those shot by people who were present. I was very impressed with his self-control. The people he shot are portrayed as heroes by the left. And in fact, one of the last lines of one of the articles that I read was rather telling. It said that, and it was from a rather liberal news perspective, and yet it said that the point of the left was to portray him as part of the domestic terrorist extreme right associated, as it must be, the article said,
right,
with militias. So he was a militiaman. He was a man who considered himself to be responsible for caring for other people.
Yeah, but he was also 17, though, so we have to keep that in perspective as well.
Sure, he was 17. But I have an 18-year-old granddaughter. I have a 16-year-old granddaughter, 14-year-old granddaughter, 12-year-old granddaughter, 10-year-old grandson, an 8-year-old, another granddaughter, all in one family, all of whom have fired a rifle exactly like the rifle he had, and do so for fun on a range at their own house.
Yeah, that's a little bit different, wouldn't you say?
It is a little different. They don't go to places where unrest occurs.
Right. So what do you say?
Well, except, hang on a second. During the March for Life, 4 of my granddaughters, and one who is describes herself as a wannabe, came down from their home to visit us, specifically to go to the March for Life, knowing full well, and I talked to their dad about it, he told me that they knew, that there had been unrest scheduled. It's called unrest. Actually, it's called domestic violence had been scheduled against the marchers.
Mm-hmm.
Difference was they weren't carrying weapons.
Right. So let's dive a little bit deeper there, because he was at a protest or was he at a riot? Because I think that makes a big difference between whether or not a 17-year-old should be at this place. So would you say he was at a protest or was he at a riot? And the reason I'm asking this because I think this is going to be very important in his trial.
Oh, I think so too. And I think the problem is that it has been characterized as a protest. It's been characterized as a riot. And it depends on who's doing the characterizing and whether they're trying to pillory him for his experience in being there.
Well, I think the left is going to call it a protest. The right is going to probably call it a riot.
I'm absolutely certain that's the case. But what is known of the public record is that for days prior to that particular set of events, Kyle Rittenhouse was in that area on a routine basis. He was handing out water bottles to people who were there, to the police. He was helping people. The police drove by numerous times and tossed water bottles to him and his compatriots and said, "We appreciate what you're doing." Mm-hmm. It's on video. And those weren't even during riots. Those weren't during protests. He was a young man who really cared about the area he was in. And I think more importantly than was he at a riot or was he at a protest and should he have been there, I think he was enmeshed by his own sense of personal responsibility. I'm here. I've been here for days. This has started. I didn't know this was started. Here it is.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but this has been going on for days. Jacob Blake stuff happened on the 23rd of August. Mm-hmm. And he has been like the third day at this point. And let's be honest, it was a riot.
Oh, I don't doubt it was a riot.
They were burning stuff. They were looting. They were doing... This wasn't a First Amendment protected right, what they were doing. This was a riot, a full-fledged riot. No matter what the left wanted to say or whatever the case may be, this was a riot. And I think he's going to come out in court as he was at the riot. So you, a parent, a grandparent, you have a 17-year-old son. He's going to strap a rifle on his back and he said, "Dad, I'm going over to such and such a place so I can protect this building." And you know that he's going to a riot. Would you allow your 17-year-old son to go to a riot?
I probably would not. Unfortunately for Kyle Rittenhouse, he didn't have a father. He lived with his mother. His mother was a full-time health service provider. So I can only guess that she really didn't know or have anything to say to him about it.
That's what I was about to ask. If she's a single mom, works full-time, I wonder if she knew that he actually went out to Kenosha to help. That's
and
a good
I can't
question.
find any indication whether she did or not. I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything at all. What does she know? I know she was on the news saying that her son wasn't a white supremacist, but she didn't mention whether or not she knew or not. But again, back to you again as a parent.
Oh, no, I would tell my son that I would much prefer he didn't go.
Right, but how much blame would be placed on her as a parent, though? I was raised by a single mother, so I'm not trying to say, hey, oh, he didn't have a father, whatever the case may be, blame it on the mother. But looking at it, how much blame should be placed on the mother that she doesn't know where her 70-year-old son is? If she didn't know, or if she knew, how much blame should be placed on her for her to allow that he went there?
I'm not really about placing blame for a young man who is, by all accounts, an adult or on the edge of adulthood. Stop and think. When I was 18 years old, I joined the U.S. Navy expecting to go to Vietnam to combat. I know many, many young Marines who live very near me who at 17 years old joined the Marine Corps and were trained in the use of weapons much, much more powerful than what Kyle Rittenhouse had, and sent into combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was an adult. So I would say that it's not her fault either way. I don't find any indication from her neighbors, and many of them were interviewed, I don't find any indication from her neighbors that they felt that she was a negligent mother. They would know. I wouldn't know.
Right. Again, I'm not trying to put blame on her. The question has to be asked, what the blame here, because according to the law, he was still a minor. And I know he's being charged as an adult, but according to the law, technically he was still a minor. And the problem is, and that would go to one of the charges that were placed against him, is because he was a minor. That's why the misdemeanor charge is against him. But for me, going back at his age, was it wise for a 17-year-old to be helping out in such a volatile situation? Again, if we look at the law says he's 17, he's a minor. Is it wise for him to be there helping out? And also, is it wise for him to be there helping out with a rifle, a AR-15 style rifle strapped around his shoulders?
Let's first go to the question of, was it wise for him to be there? That'll be debated forever. Was it wise for anyone to be there?
I will say no.
What about Grosskreutz? Should he have been there?
I will say no.
What about the reporter? By the way, you mentioned the reporter. I read an article. I read a report that reporter is actually being charged with a misdemeanor, reckless endangerment, because he apparently is the one who fired the pistol directly behind Rittenhouse as Rittenhouse was running, and may have precipitated Rittenhouse turning and shooting the man behind him. Now, Grosskreutz, in the videos I saw, and admittedly they were dark, it's hard to tell for sure, but he had a pistol in his hand. Many witnesses said that. And in the videos I saw, it looked like I saw a muzzle flash at least once from his pistol. Some of the witnesses said he fired at Rittenhouse. So the question is, one, was it wise for him to be there? I think that'll be debated by a lot of people. I don't think it necessarily was wise for him to be there. But it certainly was an honorable thing for him to be there if he was there to protect people's livelihoods and to provide medical care, which was one of the things he said he was there for.
Right.
On the next question, was it wise for him to be carrying a weapon? I think it'd be foolish to be there and not be carrying a weapon. Was it wise for him to be carrying a weapon which was so visible and obvious? My personal weapon of choice isn't that visible and obvious. And in a situation like that, I don't carry a long gun. But if I wanted people to understand, I have a stinger, and if you attack me, there'll be a penalty. What I normally carry, where they would never know I had it until the time came that I had to use it. I tend to be the gray man. I tend to hide. I tend not to be seen. Obviously, if you're standing in front of a place where someone is in the process of rioting and trying to destroy the symbols of wealth, the vehicles, you're already being seen.
Right.
So, the weapon of choice doesn't really enter into it so much unless it's a matter of the power of the weapon. And certainly that was a more powerful weapon he was carrying than what I carry.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those questions come into it, all have to be answered before anyone could come to any reasonable conclusion as to whether it is wise for him to be carrying that weapon.
The way I look at it is someone much smarter than me came up with their 4 rules of stupid. And I'm not saying Kyle Rittenhouse is stupid or anything. You know, some folks don't like the word stupid, but the 4 rules of stupid is like, don't go stupid places at stupid times, doing stupid things with stupid people. And it is said that if you break at least 2 of those, you're looking for trouble. You can break 1 and maybe get away, but if you break 2 or more of those, you're looking for trouble. And I'm thinking, okay, being at the riot is a stupid place. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it was after dark. And I'm going to guess it was probably maybe around 10 or so. I don't remember.
I think it was.
But that was a stupid time. He was definitely there with stupid people. Yeah, can you argue whether or not he was doing stupid things? His stated purpose of being there was noble. So I'm going to give him 3 out of 4. He broke 3 of the 4 rules of stupid. I'll say, man, I don't think it was wise for him to be there. I really don't. I understand the noble cause. I understand everything. But I also will say, I don't think it was wise to be there with a visible weapon like that, especially being a 17-year-old. For me, and again, I'm not dragging him on in the mud and all this stuff, but I'm simply saying, at that point, and I don't want to blame his mother, but at this point, you are going as a minor into a place where you know, in my mind, because I'm thinking, you know that this thing is going to become dirty. Because from the videos I've watched and all what have been happening all summer since George Floyd of last year, we knew that, hey, you go to these places, they're going to be gunshot, they're going to be fire, they're going to be looting, this is well-known knowledge. So if you're going to go in these places, I would say, yes, if you're going to go there, at least walk with something to protect yourself. But I'm thinking a 17-year-old going to that place and then carrying an open, you're going to be a target. The target is going to be on his back because you have a rifle strapped over you and you are opposing what the majority was doing. So you're putting out the fire when they're setting the fire. So they're going to be against you. So, and having a visible weapon, I would say on the wise part, whether or not it was wise for him to be there, I would say that was a big no in my book.
Well, devil's advocate here.
Mm-hmm.
Law enforcement officers break all 4 rules of stupid literally every moment of every day of their lives.
But that's their job. That's what they need to do. You know.
Well, and Kyle Rittenhouse did say, and according to the articles I read, he actually identified so much with it that standing and talking to the police, he said, this is our job. This is what we need to do. But remember, go back to the beginning. Kyle Rittenhouse had been a police cadet, had ridden with the police on numerous patrols. What he saw while on those patrols, I have no idea. But I have ridden with the police. I've ridden with the California State Highway Patrol. I can tell you it's not a boring job when you're not a policeman. Probably a little bit intoxicating when you think about, I could be doing this too. And of course, as a current militia member, I could be doing those things. Matter of fact, we do.
But you're not a minor though.
No, absolutely not. I'm far on the other side of being a minor.
Something else that muddies the waters, I think, is the fact that in all of the instances of rioting in the nation that happened in 2020, there was a group of people legitimately, peacefully protesting that I think were overshadowed by the violent rioters and everything. And so some protests either started out peaceful and then they became riotous, or they were riotous at the beginning because you had rioters mixed in with protesters, troublemakers mixed in with decent people. And that makes things a bit more difficult. They're going to have a hard time, as we've said before, trying to kind of piece through that in the courts to figure out whether this was a riot or whether it was a protest. That's going to affect his trial as well. And also the messaging of what an AR-15 is on a person, right. It means 2 different things to 2 different groups of people. Like yes. To us, the AR-15 is a symbol of freedom. It's a symbol of responsibility and of defending and taking care of your own and your neighborhood. But to people on the left, it's a symbol of oppression. It's a symbol of hate and violence, and no one ought to have it. And so all of these things will probably play into how everything plays out in court. And so we know that after he shot those people, he went and turned himself in, especially after he aimed at, I can't remember who the last person was. He aimed at the last person. Might have been Grosskreutz.
I think it was, yes.
Right. And then after that, he walked away and turned himself in to the police. But as he was walking toward the police, they pretty much told him to get out of the way. And they didn't stop him. They didn't do anything to apprehend him. And people wondered about that.
And the important things to remember about that are that these are not the police in his hometown with whom he had done the ride-along.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any reason to assume, nor have I found any statement that indicates that the police in Kenosha knew him. And they didn't know him.
I don't think they had any reason to assume that he had just shot people, right? They were literally just coming into the situation. They don't know who's who, right? They don't.
And that was what their supervisor said.
Right.
A lot of confusion, a lot of noise, engines running, people screaming, guns going off. He was justifying their not arresting or detaining Rittenhouse at the spot. The problem is Rittenhouse was trying to tell them,
right,
I shot someone.
Do you think it was negligent of them to not pay any mind to what he was trying to tell them? Or was it just a situation where you've been called into a volatile situation, you're trying to get the situation under control as quickly as possible? Do you think there was negligence there, or do you think that they were just trying to make the best of a horrendous situation?
I suspect it was the latter, and I have had both on the side of right and on the side of apparent wrong interactions with police. And I will tell you that the best you can do, because they are focused on if there is or was a weapon, if there is or was a hostile act, if there is or was someone behaving in a violent manner, we don't want any of that happening. And we'll iron it all out when everyone's laying on their faces on the ground.
Right, right.
So the best thing you can do is exactly what they tell you to do. Now, here's a problem in Rittenhouse's case. They told him, get out of the street, go home. Mm-hmm. Now, no reason to think they knew he lived in Illinois, let alone rather than in Wisconsin. But he did get out of the street. He did go home. He did turn himself in. And one of the charges against him is fleeing justice.
Yeah, that was dropped, though.
Was it dropped?
Yeah.
Okay. The articles I read may be old on that. I didn't see that it had been dropped.
Yeah. Initially,
I didn't realize he was been charged with
Initially, he was charged, and I think that one was dropped.
I'm glad. It would have really been a lot of egg on the faces of law enforcement had they tried to make that stick. Because there are too many witnesses to the fact that he tried to turn himself in. Right. And ultimately did turn himself in.
Right.
So I was looking at my notes here, and some interesting points. One of the articles, and this is from NPR, right? We all know NPR is very biased. Democrats, this is their statement, have pointed to Rittenhouse as the embodiment of the threat posed by domestic terrorism. Oh, really? He's a militiaman that makes him a domestic terrorist. Check with Capitol Hill. If you're a militiaman, you're a domestic terrorist. Now, by law. After the shootings, Rittenhouse, and this is from USA Today. After the shootings, Rittenhouse walked toward police with his hands up, but they told him to get out of the street. He and his friend drove back to Illinois, where, with his mother, he turned himself into local police. Now, all of that did happen before they dropped that charge. So again, I'm glad they dropped that charge. And then the other one, and this was a comment by a lady who lived in his community and who only knew that he'd been arrested. She didn't know him personally, no interaction with her kids.
Right.
Maybe he thought he was doing the right thing, but you don't kill somebody. That's not your business to kill someone for messing with someone else's business. That's for the cops to deal with. And yet, the statement by his own defense, and I believe it's a true statement, I believe it's right, is that he was defending himself. In the videos I saw, the first case, he was being pursued down the street by a raft of people who were screaming and yelling about what they were going to do to him. I would have been terrified. So he fired one round at someone who did overtake him. Someone outran him. Guy was closing in on him. Then, as he turned to run, he tripped and fell. And the second guy came up after him with a skateboard in his hand. And witnesses said, skateboard in his right hand, he hit Rittenhouse in the head with a skateboard, while with his other hand, he tried to wrestle the AR-15 out of his hands. If I'm in possession of a firearm and someone tries to take it away from me, my one thought is, if he gets it, I'm dead.
Yeah, a police officer said to me once, if someone is wrestling for my gun and they get it, what do you think they're going to do with it?
Good question. And I think the answer is pretty obvious. So Rittenhouse fired 4 shots and killed him. Grosskreutz, 20 feet away, kneeling, pistol in his hand, fires it. I don't know, maybe he was just shooting at something on the ground. Maybe he was shooting at a rabbit. I don't know. But I don't think that's the case. And Rittenhouse, and again, I made the comment earlier that I think he demonstrated extremely good control. He fired one round, hit Grosskreutz in the arm that had the gun. Severe damage to his arm. An AR-15 can do that. 223 rounds tumble once they hit. And they do a lot of damage internally. But the point is, he fired one round. He did not fire 4, 5, 6 rounds. He did not intend to kill Grosskreutz. At least I can't imagine he did, because if it had been me and I intended to, I think on our earlier podcast, I may have mentioned that when I practice with my sidearm, I practice at 15 yards. I have 14 rounds in the magazine. And in 17 seconds, routinely, I put all 14 rounds in a 4.5-inch diameter circle. If I can do that, I'm pretty sure Kyle Rittenhouse could have done that. And he certainly demonstrated with the other 2 people whom he shot that he could put the rounds where he wanted to put them. If he wanted to kill Grosskreutz, he would have done it.
Yeah, I definitely believe so. I think the question was probably, was the police negligent in their approach?
And I don't think they necessarily were. I mean,
no, definitely not.
One of the serious problems I have with trying to answer that question, and not with other people answering it or trying to, I wasn't there. But my answer would be, I think my answer would be if I were a policeman, that in any situation in which I didn't tell him on your face, on the ground, be quiet, I probably missed an opportunity. I don't think it necessarily means I was negligent, but I probably missed an opportunity to further defuse the situation.
Yeah, I don't even think they knew what was going on at a point, because if you look at the video, they were coming up in their RVs and whatever stuff, armored vehicles coming down, and they were like telling him, move on.
And I commented to Jay earlier while you were out that that is what the police of Kenosha said in defense of their own officers. There's a lot of confusion. There were engines running. There was a lot of screaming. There were gunshots. So, question again, was it negligent? I don't know. I wasn't there, but I don't think so.
I would say definitely not. I don't think they. Yeah, I don't think they knew what was going on. From their perspective, was someone was running with a gun. Okay, what's new? If you look at the videos of the situation, there were multiple people there with a gun. Multiple.
And some of the witnesses said that they heard 20, 30, 40 gunshots going off all around them.
Yep.
And certainly in the videos that I watched where there was a soundtrack, in one of the particular videos, I could identify at least 5 different calibers of weapon by the sound they made. Kyle Rittenhouse didn't have 5 different calibers of weapon. So somebody was shooting besides Kyle Rittenhouse.
We talked earlier about how carrying the AR-15 means different things to different groups of people. To a certain group, it's a symbol of freedom, defense, to a constitutional law-abiding, you name it. And to other people, it's a symbol of oppression. And the only reason you think you're something is because you have that weapon and it's not a good thing, etc. Could Kyle Rittenhouse's situation be one where he was insensitive, I guess, to the situation, what that rifle might mean? So, you're not going to a place where people agree with you or think like you, and you have this weapon on your person, and you know what they must think that weapon represents. You say you're here to help, but you're wearing something that's such an offense to us. You have a weapon that's such an offense to us. Could his situation be one where he's provoking them with the weapon, even though he doesn't even intend to? He's provoking them just by having the weapon. And then when they react, he can just cry self-defense.
Technically, I would say he could have been insensitive and provoking them. But as soon as we move to so he could cry self-defense, we're into the realm of premeditation. He wasn't insensitive. In that case, we're into the realm of he knew full well what he was doing, and he intended. And so we're falling right back into that. Is he guilty or is he innocent? Did he plan it or did he suffer a failure of some kind that caused it? I think insensitivity, but I don't think thought beyond insensitivity. And maybe a critical factor here is that of all the rifles sold in the United States, probably somewhere around 60% of them are AR-15 style, i.e. they look like AR-15s, whether they're chambered in 223 or 308 or 300 blackout or who knows what chambering. But they look like AR-15s. Probably 60% of the rifles sold in the United States. I will tell you that having fired a 223 in an AR-15 frame, I handed it back to the man from whom I borrowed it after firing 10 rounds and literally stacking them, touching on a 100-yard range over open sights. And I said, this rifle makes me look like a lot better shooter than I'll ever really be. It's one of the most pleasant rifles in the world to shoot. It's no wonder it's so comfortable and so popular.
Especially among women, because they would call it a puppy dog compared to, say, a shotgun. So
I compare the sound and the feeling of a 223 when I think about shooting a .22 rifle, which I used to shoot on a high school rifle team in competition. The .22 rifle makes a spiteful spit. The 223 makes a spiteful snap. But in neither case do you even know you fired it if you didn't hear it. They're so comfortable and easy to shoot. It happens that they're also deadly.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say he was insensitive. While I would say I don't think he should have been there and I don't think he was wise for a 17-year-old to be there, I don't even think he was insensitive because, again, if you're going to make the decision to go there, I would go there armed. If I was going there, I'm definitely going to take something with me that I can protect myself. I probably wouldn't go there. Trust me, if you find me at a riot, I would be dead and someone would have killed me and dragged me there because you wouldn't find me at a riot. That's how much I am against going to these places.
Well, and I will tell you, as a militiaman, and I am an active militiaman, I've not yet been to a violent situation. But just this last weekend, I was part of an organization in Southwest that went down to provide disaster relief. Personal cost, about $150 for 2 days that we spent. The other members, I don't know. But I do know we delivered nearly 4.5 tons of much-needed food, bottled water, clothing, blankets, heating equipment to an area that had absolutely none of those things and had single-digit nights and only mid-15 temperatures in the daytime for 9 days straight. Those people had not had anything. They were very much appreciative. And, oh, by the way, we were in the police department parking lot in the local town the whole time, and the police were out helping us with what we were delivering. And I'm probably the only one of our members who didn't have a weapon on me. We weren't going to do a violent situation. It's just a practice, it's a habit. But I would agree that... So, 2 thoughts. If I were not going into a violent situation, and I knew I wasn't going into a violent situation, and I was going to be armed anyway, and I don't have my concealed carry permit, so I don't typically carry. But if I were and I were carrying, and I were not going into a violent situation, I'd be carrying a sidearm, something not obvious. I kind of think if I were where Kyle Rittenhouse had been, I probably would be carrying a long gun, and it would be something very intimidating, because if I'm going to carry it and be in some place which I expect to be dangerous, I'd like people, at least those who think before they act, to look at me and say, nope, not where he is. We'll go somewhere else.
Yeah, but another thing we also keep in mind, he was 17, and that means he most likely, in most states, if not all 50, he wasn't old enough to get a concealed carry permit. So the only thing he probably could have been legally carrying
was constitutional carry, you mean?
whether it's constitution carry or not, most states, if you're 17, you can't carry a handgun. At least federal laws say you can buy a handgun at 18, not a handgun, a long gun, a rifle at 18, and a pistol at 21. So he was far away from even being able to carry a pistol concealed. So we know he couldn't have done that. Another thing was that I think because he went over into Illinois and their laws, because of their firearm law say, hey, you're too young to even have this weapon, this AR-15. I don't know what Kenosha law says, but in Illinois, he was too young to have that weapon. But also, I think he borrowed the weapon from a friend that lived in Illinois.
That's part of the argument. Actually, the friend from whom he borrowed the weapon lived in Wisconsin.
Oh.
And apparently, and again, I'm not real well versed on law, but apparently from the narratives I've read that tried to build the details of all of the involvement, since he is not accused by the Kenosha police of bringing the weapon from Illinois, which obviously would be something they would have to coordinate with the police in Illinois anyway. Apparently, he was legally allowed to be in possession of the weapon in Kenosha, Wisconsin, as long as he was with responsible adults.
And the argument is, was he?
And the argument is that he got separated from those responsible adults by the attack on the group of which he was a member, because that all preceded the shooting. Right. That's one of the reasons he was running in the first place. And that seems to be a narrative that's bought into by both sides. So it makes it very hard to figure out whether he was illegal or legal in possession of the weapon, because he's not even charged with having purchased or brought the weapon. In fact, the fellow who loaned him the weapon was at least considered for misdemeanor charges for loaning a minor the weapon.
Right.
But I think that may have been dropped too, because he was with him until they were separated. So now you get down to the issue of why were they separated, and could he have avoided being separated from him? I don't know. You get a bunch of people who are attacking and you run, and do you get separated or don't you? I don't know. I wasn't there. I'll tell you, the police have a hard time with this one. They have the politics involved.
Yeah, definitely.
But then on top of that, they have the issue of, we weren't there either. So we have to try to figure it out after the case. And I will tell you, from every law enforcement officer I know, and I have many friends who are law enforcement officers, active duty now, they'll tell you that eyewitnesses, if you have only one, you can have a very certain testimony. It's probably wrong. If you have 5, you've got at least 7 conflicting testimonies, because at least 2 of them are going to change before it's all over. And they're never going to agree. So I wouldn't want to be a policeman in Kenosha, Wisconsin, trying to unravel this thing.
Well, the good thing is there are a lot of videos, and those videos have been preserved. There are a lot of videos on YouTube and all over the internet. So I'm sure the police and his defense and all these have copies of those videos that they will probably show in court. That's a good thing about it, because, yeah, eyewitness report is probably one of the most unreliable witness there is, because everybody sees stuff through the lens of their own eyes and their emotions and all the stuff that was going on at that point.
Their own personal filters.
Right.
Yeah.
You're listening to the Removing Barriers podcast. We will continue our discussion with MD about Kyle Rittenhouse, whether he's a murderer or a self-defender. We'll be right back.
Do you have the desire to earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered unto the saints? Answers in Genesis can help. They provide biblically sound books, CDs, DVDs, homeschooling materials, VBS materials, online courses, digital downloads, and the Answers magazine, and more. Plus, tickets to the Creation Museum and Ark Encounter. Go to the Answers bookstore by clicking the link in the description section below, so you too can be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks the reason of the hope that is in you.
So, MD, another question. I know you're not a lawyer, but where's the line between being a murderer and being a self-defender in this situation?
I think any lay perspective would have to say that a murderer is someone who intends to kill someone before any events even occur to cause that murder to happen. Self-defense would be the events developed around me, and I feared for my life. And I can tell you from having sat as a jury foreman in a murder trial, I bet you didn't know that about me.
No.
But it was a fascinating experience. You don't need to choose to be the jury foreman. In fact, the judge chose who was going to be the jury foreman, and they decided it was me. I can tell you that the question of, would I, in that same situation, consider the response to be reasonable, is a very, very critical question. And on that hinges the self-defense defense.
Yeah, definitely. I think there can be a very fine line between there, because the argument can be made, did he provoke the situation by running and putting out the fire? Of course, the images and the videos are not clear whether it was him who actually put out the fire with the fire extinguisher or whatever the case may be. But did he provoke the situation? Of course, we know the first person who was shot and killed was, I think it was Joseph Rosenbaum. And from watching the videos, Joseph Rosenbaum didn't look like a guy that I would say that looked very peaceful. Of course, I don't know the guy. I didn't know him. He's dead now, but he didn't look like a guy that was trying to be peaceful with Kyle Rittenhouse. He come across as like, look at me, I'm going to beat your head in, basically, kind of thing.
Well, it's interesting to note that, of all people, Snopes, in one of their infamous fact-checking, brought up the topic of the, let's see if I can say this the way Snopes said it. I had a hard time reading it with a straight face. Might not be easy to say with a straight face. The right is guilty of trying to deny the three victims their martyrdom by bringing up their criminal records. And so Snopes said, we need to find out what the truth is of their criminal records. In typical Snopes fashion, they said partially true, partially false, then went on in detail, and sure enough, all three were guilty under law and had served the things they were charged with. And the particular man you're talking about, one of the things he was charged with and served time for was strangulation. Another was when he threatened and attacked family members, both by hand and with a knife, and tried to kill him. And I believe it was his mother tried to get him to allow her to take him to a hospital for psychiatric care because he was behaving in a very bizarre and violent fashion. And so he attacked her and tried to strangle her. So was he a peaceful guy? No, you probably had a pretty good observation. The second one, what was his name? Gruber, I think?
Huber.
I'm sorry?
I think it's Huber. Huber.
Huber, yes. The extreme right, the bad guys in this case, said that he was a pedophile. Snopes was forced to agree that he had served time as a pedophile. Criminals? Yeah, okay. Grosskreutz? He had been charged numerous times with violence, domestic violence, and violence against people he barely knew. So these weren't peaceful people. These weren't nice people. These weren't people that I would take home to mama for dinner. That's just an observation. I would say your observation in looking at the videos was probably pretty accurate. He probably didn't look like he was intending to be friendly.
Right. I did do some research in their background, but even not bringing up their background, just the demeanor of Rosenbaum before he got shot and everything didn't say to me, hey, this guy was really like, look at me, I'm Jack and I'm in charge here. Just the attitude kind of thing, the countenance on his face kind of telling me that, hey, this guy is not really a guy you want to be messing with at this point, and he's probably capable of doing something really crazy, if you want to put it that way. So I just didn't feel like, hey, look, this guy is, again, I don't know him, so I don't know, but it just, the vibe I get from watching the video, looking at him, you can tell by someone's face, demeanor, if they're meaning harm or they have some good intent. He just didn't look that way to me. He looked like he was like, oh, you put out my fire, I'm going to get you for that.
I would suggest that in any urban situation, if you can't look at someone and at least have an idea whether they mean you harm, you're probably a victim. Just waiting to happen. So, yeah, you're probably right.
So we have been discussing several of the things that happened throughout that night with Kyle Rittenhouse. The charges that were laid against him, we're going to lay out the charge and we're going to give our unprofessional, non-lawyer verdict in the court of public opinion on these charges. So the first one, he was charged with first-degree reckless homicide on Joseph Rosenbaum. Do you find him guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty. Am I allowed to say why?
Of course, go ahead.
It was self-defense.
Simple as that?
It's as simple as that. In the videos I saw, it's as simple as that.
How about you, Jay?
I agree 100%. In the videos, before Rosenbaum was chasing him, Rosenbaum verbally expressed his desire to hurt him, and Rosenbaum was running after him, obviously intending to do him harm. When the shot fired that caused Rittenhouse to turn around, by the time Rittenhouse turned around, Rosenbaum was literally in his face, inches from his face. And if I were in Rittenhouse's shoes, I would have shot too. I'm going to have to say not guilty on that one.
Yeah, I will definitely agree that's definitely not guilty in my book. Definitely based upon Rosenbaum's behavior, that he as Jay said, intend harm. And I think that Kyle Rittenhouse didn't have a choice but to defend himself, and against a deadly threat, use deadly force. First degree reckless endangerment. Richard McGinnis, and that's the reporter. Jay, innocent or guilty?
I would also have to say that he's not guilty on this one. He did not intend to, like, the same way he did not intend, like, premeditate murder for Rosenbaum. He did not intend to endanger McGinnis. In fact, McGinnis was the one who was running behind them to get the video, to get the story. Now, I could see both sides, because as self-defenders, we always say you're responsible for every single round that comes out of the chamber or that comes out of the barrel. You're responsible, and you should know your target and what's behind it. You might be able to stretch it and he's guilty of reckless endangerment. I personally don't think so, simply because McGinnis was the one running to get the footage, if you would, and to try and see what was happening. When Rittenhouse turned around to fire, I don't think there was any premeditation there. It was more like, my life is in danger, here we go, around hit. So in my opinion, I would say not guilty, although I can see both sides. I could see how you could stretch it to say reckless endangerment.
MD?
As a hunter, I'll tell you that in any situation where I'm in a hide and I see a deer, I glass that deer pretty carefully to make sure there's nothing behind it. But the deer isn't shooting at me. The deer hasn't cursed me. The deer hasn't attacked me. The deer is not, as Jay said, in my face with stated intent to do me harm. Were that the case, my round might go through the deer, but the deer would be dead. It's a hard statement, but it's nonetheless the truth. Whatever's behind that deer has to deal with its own dangers. So I would say not guilty.
Yeah, for me, this one is a hard one, to be honest. As Jay said, I see both sides. I see that the fact that you need to know your target and what's behind it, what's above it, below it, and whatever proposition you want to put there. You definitely need to know, because you're responsible for every bullet that you fire. But at the same time, you were running behind a known danger to get a footage. So you kind of put yourself in a situation. What you want him to do? So if he didn't shoot, then it's either your life or mine. I'm sorry, I'm going to choose yours probably. Because if I'm protecting my life and you're going the way so that I can protect my life, then you kind of put yourself in the situation. He didn't run towards you and fire. You run toward him. So I'm a little bit on the fence. I can see that this one might stick a little bit. But if I'm pressed, I would say not guilty. But if he's charged with this one, I wouldn't be surprised. But I can't see how they're going to say not guilty on Rosenbaum and then guilty on this one, though. That to me, because, both of them happen at the same time. So that one is a tough one for me, but I will say not guilty as well.
Now, I don't know anything about law, but I wonder if the question of whether he was at a riot or protest will come into play here.
Definitely.
Because in my mind, if you say riot, we're talking anarchy. There are no rules. This is war, right? Every man for himself type of situation. I imagine the way that they would prosecute that, or the way that they would piece that apart, would be different from if it were in a a situation ruled by law. Like if it were just, you're out at a protest, as it were. So I wonder if the definition of riot or protest will come into play with whether or not he's there.
Yeah, so I understand what Jay's saying there in terms of Richard McGinnis. But yeah, I was watching a lawyer actually discussing this very case. And the first thing the lawyer established, let's be honest, he was at a riot. I honestly believe that there's no way it's going to come out in court that he was at a First Amendment protected protest. There's no way that can be true. And even if the left want to say it was a protest, there's no way when you see the amount of cars that were burned and the buildings that were burned and the amount of gunshot. Just let's put that to rest. He was at a riot. There's no way anyone that is fear-minded could say that, hey, this was a protest. This was a riot. So if it was a riot, then did McGinnis put himself in danger? I would say, yeah, I think McGinnis definitely put himself in that danger. And again, I won't be surprised he's actually charged with this one. But I think, and if I'm pressed, I would definitely say not guilty. All right, so another charge. He's been charged with first-degree reckless homicide, and that would be Anthony Huber. Innocent or guilty?
It still comes back to self-defense. I believe Huber was the one who was, Maybe I've got the wrong one. I was thinking he was the one who attacked him with the skateboard, but maybe
I think that he's the one that did attack him with the skateboard and a shot foot. So he's the one that came in to swing the skateboard at him, and I think come in with a foot to actually stomp him.
Right. And that goes back to witnesses said he had the skateboard in one hand, hit Rittenhouse in the head with it. By the way, and this will not come out in the court because I'm certain that the prosecution would find it to be very, very prejudicial. But in one article I read, police said they knew him for the skateboard as a weapon. And in one case, a policeman had been hospitalized with a cracked skull because of being hit by the edge of that skateboard. I still think self-defense. And particularly since witnesses said he had the skateboard in one hand, hitting Rittenhouse with it, and he had Rittenhouse's rifle in the other hand, trying to take it away from him.
Yeah, I would say, again, in my opinion, that's self-defense. It's just a terrible situation all around. I would say that was self-defense, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I will go again with not guilty on that.
Not guilty.
On that charge. And the other one, attempt first-degree intentional homicide. And this is one Grosskirt.
Attempted first-degree intentional
homicide.
I'm going to say that by the very words, he's not guilty, because under every law I have ever heard, and I'm not a lawyer, but I have heard them. Again, I was a jury foreman on a murder trial. You can't assume an intent.
Well,
But if we're going to assume intent, I'm going to go back to my argument that if he intended to kill him, he had more rounds.
Well, this is the one that was shot in the arm. He actually had a firearm. He had a pistol. And he was going after Kyle. And Kyle shot him with blow off his bicep.
Bicep.
Yes. Yeah. But again, Kyle Rittenhouse still had more rounds. If he intended to kill him, he would have killed him.
Oh, he missed.
There is nobody who has said that Kyle Rittenhouse fired rounds and missed. I think he demonstrated excessively good gun control. He hit everything he aimed at.
I would agree that he was a pretty good shot. I think he fired that rotor bomb like 4 times, and I think he missed at least 2 of them.
You're saying for Grosskreutz, he was aiming for center mass, but actually hit the bicep? Okay,
Probably.
I see what you're saying.
I agree that it was self-defense. I agree that he's definitely not guilty, but I'm just simply saying that, I'm thinking about like Peter who go after Marcus' ear. Well, you can argue, was he really going after the ear or was he going after the
neck?
The neck,
yeah.
So maybe Kyle missed, but I think definitely this is because he was coming after Kyle. If there's a clear one, he was coming after Kyle with a gun in his hand. and Kyle shot him and he backed off. And to MD's point, the other guy that was coming behind of him, when Kyle pointed the gun at him, he backed off and Kyle didn't fire. So definitely he did show a lot of restraint, because if he was just firing wildly, that last guy that raised his hand and started backing up and he didn't fire, he would have shot him too.
That would be the intentional homicide point. If he was intentional on killing people, the guy that actually stopped would have been shot dead too.
Right. And I think
killed more people.
I think that might be the other charge against him, would be first degree reckless endangerment. And this is an unknown male. And I think that might be the last guy that he pointed the rifle at. He raised his hand and back off and Kyle didn't fire. Innocent or guilty?
Has to be innocent. I mean, reckless endangerment. In a situation where he's already had to fire his weapon in self-defense, and there's another one, and he had the ability to look and discern and say, oh, he's not a threat, and not shoot him. There's no reckless anything about that. He considered very carefully and responded properly.
Yep, I would definitely agree with that. I think he's the one that actually raised his hand and didn't fire. But I think if he's found guilty in the higher charges like the murder, he'll be also found guilty on the attempted intentional homicide, however they want to phrase it. But I also think if he does get found not guilty in the higher ones, he was also found not guilty on the lower one.
So basically it boils down to whether or not this trial goes political or not.
I personally have lost faith in the executive branch and in the legislative branch. I still have some level of faith in the courts, because I think they still at least try to go on facts and not politics. So I believe to some degree that the facts will come out in the court, and maybe Kyle Rittenhouse might be, at least for these ones that we have mentioned, that he probably will get not guilty. The McGinnis one, I'm a little bit on the fence with that one. And this one, the very last one, I would say possession of a weapon by a person under 18. I would say definitely, if you're going to be guilty on one of them, that's going to be the one. We know he's guilty on that one. He was in possession of a weapon with under 18 and he shouldn't have the weapon, at least according to Wisconsin law. So that one is probably not even an argument, but that's a misdemeanor. The others are, 60?
Yeah, I think maximum 60 years in prison for each of those.
So
minus the reckless homicide, that carries a penalty of life, but the rest of them would be minimum 60 years.
Yeah. So my verdict would be that I believe Kyle Rittenhouse will be charged for at least one, if I'm going to say probably two, the endangerment, reckless endangerment. Definitely one. I will say he's not going to get off of that one.
I would agree with you on what he will be potentially convicted of.
Right.
So, personal experience again, as a jury foreman. This case we were sitting on happened to be juveniles in a gangland initiation, as far as we can tell. And in fact, their friends were there in court in their gang colors and trying very hard to intimidate the jury. I will tell you, I am very glad that the jury wasn't intimidated. One of the jury members was of the same ethnic group as the gang was. I won't say which one it was because it doesn't really matter to this. But that particular member, understanding the facts, and they were clear, the evidence was very well presented, and the defense was, did you find the knife? But with everything else, it wasn't necessary to find the knife. And that particular member, when I polled the jury, said, guilty, no question at all. But one member said, well, I'd hate to see a 12-year-old go to prison. So I asked him, is he guilty? And he said, yes. And I said, how do you vote? He said, not guilty. I said, you don't have that option. If he's guilty, he's guilty. And I agree, I'd hate to see a 12-year-old go to prison. But this was a 12-year-old who very clearly tried to murder 3 people. And it's not a matter of judging intent. It's judging the severity of wounds and how long he kept stabbing with people trying to stop him. He intended to kill. So, jury foreman has to deal with, it must be a 100% verdict. If you get one who looks at it and says, yeah, okay, Kyle Rittenhouse was 17 years old and he had a weapon, but you don't have the option when that individual says, I will not convict. When he tells the judge, I will not convict. When the jury foreman is required to walk out and say to the judge, we have a hung jury, or we can't come to an agreement, or we have one or more jurors who say the judge can't direct a verdict. It only takes one.
Yeah. I definitely think that, of course, I'm not going to be on the jury. I don't live in that area of the world, but...
And if I did, they wouldn't let me be on the jury
Right.
either, because I have way too strong an opinion on the topic.
Right. But definitely, I think if you're going to be convicted of any one of these, because I think they're individual charges, so if he's convicted on any one of these, it's definitely not going to be the possession of a weapon by a person under 18.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a case of a man on a New York subway, and this was probably 30 years ago, who was in possession of a weapon, and he was accosted by 5 young men who had sharpened screwdrivers and were brandishing them and had told him they intended to kill him. And he shot all 5 of them with a weapon. This was in New York. He could not legally own that weapon. Ultimately, after all the attempts by everyone to pillory the man with the gun, what he was guilty of was possession of a weapon.
Right. And the way the law works, at least the way I understand it, not because Kyle Rittenhouse illegally had a gun, didn't remove his right that he could use that gun legally to self-defense. So, yeah, he shouldn't have the gun, but he had the gun and he had a legal right to self-defense no matter what your age. Whether you're a minor or not, you have a legal right in this country to defend yourself. And by using the gun to defend himself, they're not going to say, oh, you shouldn't have the gun, so you're going to be guilty playing all over. You're going to be guilty of possession of the gun, but the other stuff you can be found not guilty on those.
The audience can't hear my head rattling. I think you probably can, but I was nodding my head with you the whole time you were talking. I agree, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. As I think about the Kyle Rittenhouse situation and just the uproar about it, not waiting for facts to come out and all these things, I think we pretty much agree, probably except for some minor stuff, that Kyle Rittenhouse is mostly not guilty. Maybe except for that one charge that be possession of a weapon. The Bible says in Proverbs 28 verse 28, when the wicked rise, men hide themselves, but when they perish, the righteous increase. I also think about Psalms 11, 3-7, and it says, if the foundation be destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids try the children of men. The Lord tried the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence, his soul hateth. Upon the wicked he shall rain snares, fire and brimstone, and a horrible tempest. This shall be the portion of their cup. For the righteous Lord loveth righteousness. His countenance doeth behold the upright. As I think about Kyle Rittenhouse, I'm actually glad I'm not the judge of this situation. In the court of public opinion, that as we just went through this case, we can come up with all our stuff, but Kyle will be tried in the court of law. Not in our opinions, not in our feelings, and in stuff like that. But, as I think about that as well, there's coming a judgment for us, a trial for us as well. The Bible says in Hebrews 9 and verse 27 that as it appointed unto man once to die, but after this is a judgment. There's a judgment coming for us. The Bible says that we have a sure appointment. It's appointed unto man once to die. The funny thing about all this, Kyle Rittenhouse know his court date. He know the time and place he need to show up for his court date, his trial. We don't know the time and when our judgment is going to take place. We just don't know. But the Bible says it's appointed unto us. If he has a good lawyer and they need more time to prepare his defense, they can go to the judge and say, hey, can we push it back a month or two, and the judge might grant that. We can't do that. We can't go and say, hey, you know what? I'm not ready yet. Can I get this appointment, this sure appointment pushed back? No, the Bible says there's appointed unto man once to die. And when the Lord is ready for you, no matter what, you're going to face that appointment. The appointment cannot be changed. It cannot be rescheduled. There's a coming judgment for all mankind. Coming judgment by disappointment. The Bible tells us in John 3:36, he that believeth on the Son had everlasting life, and he that believeth not the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abideth on him. The wrath of God abideth on him presently, right now. If you're not saved, the wrath of God abideth on you. You're already being judged. You have that appointment coming, but you have already been judged. But you know the good thing about all this? Not only do you have a sure appointment, because we can't change that appointment. One day we all going to die and face our Maker. We have a sure judgment. We know that we're going to be judged according to our deeds. But we can also have a sure defense. We can have a sure defense, and that is only found in the Lord Jesus Christ. The Bible says in Romans chapter 9, verse 9 and 10, that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. For with the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. We have a sure defense, and a sure defense is found and guaranteed in Jesus Christ through repentant faith. And you know what? We are assured this defense is going to win the case, because the Bible makes it clear that if we confess with our mouth and believe in our heart that God hath raised him from the dead, not that thou might be saved, but thou shalt be saved. So my plea for you today is that, are you ready for that sure appointment, that sure judgment? Have you found yourself in that sure defense that is Jesus Christ?
Well, we had a great time on the podcast discussing this situation, discussing Kyle Rittenhouse. MD, thank you so much for joining us and for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to us about this situation with Rittenhouse. We always appreciate your point of view and your expertise. Thank you for joining us on the Removing Barriers podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed this. I'll be happy to do it again anytime.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening. To get a hold of us or to support this podcast, go to anchor.fm/removing barriers. This has been the Removing Barriers podcast. We attempted to remove barriers so that we all can have a clear view of the cross.